Hi. Today I decided to work on some rosemary. I have about 7 rosemary that I picked up from the big box store just to see how they would do. What I'm going to do is not a fine detailed styling on them. Basically I'm going to check out the roots, make sure that they're doing really well. Maybe comb out the top a little bit so I can see what I'm working with, and test the brittleness of these branches. They do snap really easily, which I've experienced by growing them in my garden. So I'll see how much of a bend I could put on these. I'll use wire if I can, and I'll do a little bit of clipping. Like for instance, I don't need this super long branch here, so I might do some sort of a cutting off of that, see if that grows. And then I'll be planting these in the ground at a later time. Right now it's pretty rainy outside, so I'm just spending some time here in the greenhouse. Let's get started. These were on clearance. These are half off of their normal price. That puts them about $4 a piece. That's not so bad for this time of year. Let's see, this is going to get a little messy, and me being a clean person, I like to keep my messes contained. Now here smells like rosemary. That's good. That's not such a bad thing. All right, so I'm going to make a pile for my cuttings, and I'm also going to, for right now, take this out of the pot. Oh, nice roots. See that nice root growth there? I'll be able to comb out the top just a little bit because there's not much roots on the top there. Let's do my cutting bin here. I'm just going to scrape away a little bit of this top soil, and it's coming off real easy. And I'm doing this mainly just so I can see where the interesting parts of the roots are. I'm not actually going to cut any roots if I can get away with it. The only roots I would cut would be ones that are a little bit higher on what will become the main parts of the trunk. So this is just a chopstick. Happens to be a nice thick chopstick, which is kind of rare. Chopsticks are usually pretty thin and breakable. This one I can barely even bend it. This is, I believe, some sort of a hard wood. Not really sure, but that's the difference in chopsticks. Some of the other chopsticks come like this, and so these chopsticks are actually from a restaurant that I got when I did some takeout, and these are your typical bamboo chopsticks. They are very bendy. I could bend this set of 2 really easily. They do the little snap thing, and then they're even more bendable. These are super flexy, and when you get going into the roots with these things, I've actually broken them just by trying to get into roots. So this is not quite as substantial as I would like. What these ones are good for is actually going between the edge of a pot and a tree trunk, cutting it to size and holding it into place. Alternatively, you could put them, when you put your wire ties up through the pot, you could put these on top similar to this, and then attach the wires onto that to hold it down. And you can see that the pressure it's exerting on the roots here is quite enough to hold that down. If there's no strong roots, like this has very fine roots, you could put that on this side, this on this side, and then take your wire ties and go straight down onto those. And just with 2 chopsticks, that's enough to get it to set in there until the roots grow really well. I have a whole bin of those back there. When I go to get Chinese food on Friday nights sometimes to treat my family to some treats for doing good for the week, doing good in school, doing good at work, we go and get Chinese food or teriyaki a lot of times, and I always ask for extra chopsticks. So that's where most of my chopstick collection comes from. Thank you, restaurants, for supporting my bonsai habit. Okay, now I'm looking inside here, and I'm seeing a few roots that are up pretty high. What I'm going to do with these roots that are up that high is I'm actually going to be cutting just these stringiest ones and getting those out of the way, because those won't actually be used later on. Also, I have a few of these twigs that aren't going to be very good for cuttings, I don't think. So I'm going to just clear the path a little bit. so I have a clean surface to start wiring on if I do decide to wire. I have 7 of these, like I said, and I'm just going to take them one at a time and see how they go. I find that I don't often go into a styling with a really definite plan at this stage. This is just basically nursery stock, and it's its first styling. It doesn't have enough going on for me to really say this is going to be a tall image, or this is going to be windswept or cascade. I look more at what I've got to start with at the bottom, and I work my way out from there. Because everything beyond the base can be regrown. It can be trimmed and shaped and wired at this stage. Sometimes while you're working on these, you'll actually have separate plants also. And so at this point, I'm also looking to see if there's any chance of separating them. On this particular one, it's actually all connected to a trunk here that's got a decent thickness, but it doesn't really have any super great trunk character right now. So what's going to happen with these, once I get the initial styling done, just some twists and turns, is I'm going to be planting these in the ground and letting them grow for probably at least a year before I do much with them. During that time, I'll let them grow pretty freely, let them thicken up, and also I'll just keep them really healthy. I'll probably also use trimmings if they get exceptionally tall. I could use the trimmings in, you know, some potatoes or something like that. They're really great for that. Summertime is a time where I use a little bit of rosemary in some food. It's great to go out there and get those nice fresh green, wonderful blue-green sort of trimmings for fresh rosemary. Turns out rosemary is not actually what people thought it was. I believe it was a couple of years or so ago it was reclassified as a sage. Used to be called Rosmarinus officialis or something like that, one of those Latin things. And now rosemary is really just a secondary sort of nickname for it. I've grown up knowing it as rosemary, so that's what I'm comfortable with. So I found basically where the trunk flare happens, where it meets the soil. I can tell below that is all fine roots. So this definitely is not ready to go into any sort of bonsai pot. It has no structural roots really to support itself. In fact, you can tell it just wobbles all over the place like this. So nursery stock like that, especially this sort of really what we think of as an herby sort of herbaceous plant, it needs to have some sort of rootage to hold it down and make it really successful. Basically, thick roots that are an extension of the trunk will make it look like a tree more so than a shrub. So that's why it's going to need a couple years in the ground. What I'm looking at the bottom here is I have 1, 2, 3 directions coming out of one spot here. I like this top one because it's actually really bushy right up above that. So this middle part will definitely be kept. And then I need to decide, do I want to keep one or the other or neither of these other 2 side shoots? And looking at them, this thinner one I'm pretty sure is coming off. That one's an easy decision. And then after I do that, I'll see if I want to keep this other one. And when I trim, a lot of times for nursery stock that I know is going to snap real easy, I'll just use my hands. I won't use a clipper. So in fact, this one, there, I got my cutting, first cuttings on. What that does is it leaves a nice natural break in the trunk there. This will completely heal over. It's got a little indentation. This is just the way nature naturally does things. If, say, an animal or a heavy branch of some kind were to break that down, this is exactly what would happen. So in that case, I'm not going to be using these fancy concave cutters to trim it close to the trunk, because I know that's just going to heal right over. This will yield at least a couple few cuttings, but for right now, oh, it smells good. Right now I'm just going to put it in my cutting bin. I'll deal with that in a little while. So now that I've gotten that done, now I have a couple of directions that's a little bit easier to deal with. This one has branching already pretty close to it. This is a very usable branch. I'm not ready to cut that off yet. Up at the top, I've come to another point here where I have 1, 2, 3 sections. And I actually want to start creating some movement. So this middle section, easy for me, I'm just going to cut that off. Now this one, I may or may not be able to break that off. I'm going to see here in just a second. Yep, so rosemary breaks just like that, super easy. This is also a good way to know what the response is going to be when you apply wire to the plant. I'm not even worried about this little extra nub there. If this were thick enough, I probably would have created some dead wood features on this. But this is so thin, it's thinner than the end of my chopstick here. It's not ready for really anything substantial. Anything that I add to it right now will be either grown over or disintegrated by the time I'm ready to turn it into bonsai. This is at least 2 years from being in an actual bonsai pot. Probably longer than that. This will be some bonsai stock for a while that I grow on. Okay, so now I have a few directions and it branches out from there. This one I'm not feeling strong about wiring it because it's breaking so easily. So basically what I'm going to do, yeah, if I wire that down, that will definitely snap. Anywhere where you have a Y like that and you want to bend something down from right at that point, there's a high chance of this snapping right there. You can use something like raffia or a wire tourniquet or something right here to try to keep that from happening. But at this stage, I'm almost certain that if I do anything too substantial to that, it's just going to be a done deal. There will be no growth because it will have snapped off. So it's not quite ready for that. I also don't want something that just looks like a poof. You know, I was trying to get away from the shrub. So let's see. I may not even want both of these low branches anymore. Just looking at it, if I took it down to 2 instead of the 3 here, it wouldn't be so bad either. The only challenge with that is that now I have a long scar on this one side, and the plant's going to have to heal that in addition to feeding both of these. So if I leave as much else as I can on that, it'll heal much faster. So this one's not ready to do a whole lot of extra work right now. I could definitely put some twists and turns in these thinner pieces up there, but I'm going to avoid this thick piece. So instead of doing that, when I place this in the ground, I'll likely go at quite an angle, such as this, and then this top part will right itself. Everything I don't trim will grow new shoots in the upward direction. Basically, we'll be looking at this coming out of each of these ends here, and that's okay. Mainly what I'm looking to do is grow some new growth that really twists and turns. So on this one, I'm done. I'm going to put it back in its pot, and that will stay like this until I'm ready to plant it, which I might plant it this fall. We're almost done with fall, but I might plant it anyways. Which is basically just like winter protection for it, honestly. If I put it in the ground, it has protection from freezing a little bit more so than it would in this pot. Oh man, this stuff smells great. Because I'm not trimming any of the roots, what I would do is actually make sure it's got mulch all the way up to the trunk also. I think I will be doing that. I'll do that in a follow-up video. Moving on. This one's a little bit different. This one's a little taller. So this one has some really tall shoots, and a lot of them. This one could be an interesting candidate for doing some wiring. Let's pop it out and have a look. Typical nursery stock roots, not much at the top, a lot down at the bottom where the water collects, and not a lot of roots to really worry about up here in the top as far as stopping me from raking away a little bit of this dirt. Now this is actually an optional step for nursery plants. Nursery stock like this, you can just leave the soil all the way up there. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm actually trimming away some of these surface roots to get to the root flare, and that way new roots will grow more likely strong from down below instead of up here at the top. And this one is a little different than the last one in that it doesn't have as many of these basically layered roots up into the branching. Okay, this one's pretty good. So this has a nice thick trunk, and then it branches quite a bit as soon as the that thickness ends. It goes into a lot of different branching here. This one's going to be a good candidate, I think, for starting kind of smaller. I'm going to go ahead and do some trimming on this up at the top. And I'm not actually going to worry about wiring on this just yet, because this one has plenty of movement in here. What I will be doing is deciding if I'm going to keep all of this for sacrifice branches or if I'm going to be removing some. Yeah, I'm removing some. So I'm going to be going by thickness. Where I have branches across from each other, I'm going to be taking out the smaller one as I go up the trunk there. So again, specialized tool in my hand. Made a slight little tear there, which is just fine. And let's see where the next crossing one is. It's up there a little bit further. Alright, so I've just cleared the path a little bit so that you can start to see where everything's going to grow. This one has an interesting little root that's layered and then kind of found its way along the trunk here, and that will create a little bit of interest on the trunk there as it goes. It'll have kind of a sinewy sort of effect on it. So this one I am going to trim back just a little bit because it's a different beast than that other one. It's already got a little bit more thickness. So without much really thought about it, I'm just kind of trimming back to a little bit lower section where I have just going to trim this back to a little lower section where I have basically the formation of a slight bit of a pad here. And again, this is not going to be its final look. This is almost more like topiary. Getting a lot of cuttings out of this. And I'm kind of going up in height as I go up into the center of it. Lower and then kind of mounded. It'll grow into somewhat of a mound for a year or two. And then when I'm ready, I'll be able to give it a little bit better shaping. This one that comes out to the side, I like this branch going out, so I'm going to continue that by trimming off most that goes back up. So now I have it going out from that point. And now it's just kind of a tall mound. It doesn't really look like much right now. And what this will do is it'll just completely poof with new foliage when it starts growing strong. These, when I've grown them in the garden as herbs, I chop them back, and then within a month, the entire thing is fuller than it was before I chopped it back. Even down to bare wood, I've had it come back strong right from the old trunk. So these things are actually in love with my Pacific Northwest weather. I don't know if it's really similar to its Mediterranean climate because I've never been there to experience it myself. But this is what I've heard is that they enjoy Mediterranean type climate. It's definitely wetter here, so I'm kind of surprised that they like it this much. We don't get as much sun as it probably needs, but they just grow like mad. So another one done. Now it would be easy enough to put this into a bonsai pot and call it a bonsai, but this is not my intention with this. I really want some character-filled, herbaceous-looking bonsai down the road. So I'm planning for the future with this. But I still haven't gotten to one that I felt like wiring just yet. This one might be the one, because this one's a little different. This one's different than the other ones in that it has somewhat of a Christmas tree shape. It has a thick trunk that goes up, and it has all these side branches. This one would very easily take to some wire with these thin ones very carefully wired out with the alternating around the trunk sort of branch pattern. I could use some of these lower shoots to thicken the trunk and then trim them back later. So this one looks like it could be a good candidate for wiring finally. Still, I'm going to start with looking and seeing what these surface roots look like. My guess is it's going to be just like the other ones where it doesn't have much to speak of. Now this one actually does have one thick root here that I found already. This being such a thicker plant, it's probably a slightly different variety than the other ones. They were not really labeled very well. I mean, they're on the clearance rack. That's the way it goes. Yeah, so this one has some interesting rootage already, which I can fill back up with soil up to it. I am going to go ahead and expose a little bit more of the trunk because it has a little bit of movement down at the bottom that I'd like to do something with. And I'm just going to start creating an alternating branch pattern as I go up this. This is mostly just a cleaning exercise right now. At this point, I'm trying to decide if I really do want to actually cut these with the concave cutters or just rip them off. At this point, I'm on my first super thick branch that I'm considering keeping. If I were to rip this one off, it would leave a considerable amount of non-usable trunk right below. Usable for the foliage is what I mean. It'll be dead wood right below there. So now I have that, and I like this thickest branch, but it needs some growing. It's got one on the opposite side. I am actually going to start using these cutters now, and the reason why is that I want to just maintain a solid trunk structure from this point for a little bit. Down the line, as this thickens, I'll probably rip off some more branches and make some more deadwood a little bit at a time. So again, I'm just going alternating branch patterns, circling around the trunk. If you've watched some of my videos, you'll realize that I never look for a front anymore. I actually learned bonsai in the typical way that most people do, which is books and teachers that have gone through the same training as everybody. And the common theme in the training was come out the roots is step one, find the front is step two. And the whole purpose of combing the roots was to find the front. At nursery stock stage, it's not really worth it to me because I don't know which way this tree is going to look in 5 years from now or 2 years from now. And also I found that if you focus on one section being a certain viewing angle, let's say it was this way, you would have first branch here, second branch here, back branch here, and it looks the same all the time. Also, when you turn it the other way and consider something the back, it just looks like, well, why is that side the back? It just looks so amazing. If someone styled a tree really meticulously, every side will look really good. So for me, I want to show that off. So for this one, I just keep on turning it and seeing which way the branches will fill around as it goes up. And each direction, as I wire this, I'm going to turn it and see if it continues to look good from each direction. Also keeping in mind that bonsai change over the years. Bonsai practitioners will take a plant in a different direction. So nothing really is permanent in a plant's life. If possible, the only thing we can do is just try to get it to live as long as we can. I'm keeping a little bit more than I might normally keep on a tree that would be super flexible because I know that this will snap if I try to put too much of a bend to compress this down. Okay, so that's as much cleaning as I need to do on this. And also the thicknesses of the branches do look like they're pretty wireable. Okay, so doesn't look like much, but this is nursery stock. You got to keep in mind that this is a plan for the future. I can go ahead and add a little bit of wire to this now. As far as thick wire goes, I can add probably one thick wire and do everything I need to turn this trunk a little bit for right now. I could use that wire down the road to twist and turn it a little more. I'll try not to break it as I go. I'm okay if there's a little bit of a snap, but not more than halfway through the trunk, because that becomes structurally compromised at that point and takes a long time for it to cover that up. I do use aluminum wire as my main wire, and I don't really mind if it's not big boy wire or, you know, serious wire or whatever it's called by people who really feel that copper wire is the way to go. So this wire, I'm not having high hopes of what this wire can do, so I'm just using a relatively movable piece of wire. I know if I use anything too thick, I could potentially be able to put more force on the trunk than it can really handle. I'm also going to start it just a little bit loose. And the reason why I would start it loose is because I'm going to go for a twist as I put this on there. So, oh gosh, a little bit of looseness as you twist it will be taken up if you twist it in the same direction that the wire is going. So the challenge here is that I'm trying to put this on without breaking the branches already. I'm also not really worried about this being the best wire job ever. This is just nursery stock. This is just pre-bonsai. It's okay if I don't have it be super pretty. This is not even meant to be displayed in a club or anything like that. Basically, this is just to get it on there and then call it done. So even though this is aluminum wire and it bends pretty easily, it's still a challenge to do this without breaking anything. Alright, now what I could do if I was really interested in making this look super pretty is I could bend this into position and then bend foliage pads into position and make it look like a finished bonsai. But like I said many times during this particular demonstration, this is not for the intention of it being a finished bonsai. This is nursery stock, so keeping that in mind, I'm basically putting in twists and turns. I am going to, though, before I bend this main part, I will add the wire that's going to come out to these other branches. That way it's already in place before I go and make my major bends. I have found that for me, I prefer to add all of the wire before I do all of the bends, whenever possible. And the reason for that is if I decide that I'm able to do a tighter turn, it's easier on me to already have the wire into those tight turns when I finally need it. So you can go through wiring pretty easily with some experience, and this is exactly the type of material that will give you a lot of experience, because for one thing, it's pretty unforgiving. You're going to hear the snaps and feel the breaking point really quickly with this stuff. Whereas with something like a juniper that you might be able to bend a little bit more, or other flexible type plants like that, you'll bend them more so than you could many other plants. So learning on a difficult to wire piece such as a snappy rosemary will actually give you really good experience. So something to compare it to, I guess, would be when I was learning to drive. My dad actually told my sister and I that you're going to learn on a stick shift, a manual transmission. Because if you could drive one of those, you can drive whatever. So same thing with this. If you can wire something like a snappy rosemary, you can pretty much wire whatever. So again, the purpose of this video is not to show you wiring techniques specifically. If you do want to learn how to wire, Bonsai Mirai has a great video or more on wiring, and there's many other ones that show you some great wiring technique. Mainly what I'm doing is just showing you decision-making processes on nursery stock such as this rosemary. some of the thinking that I have going on, plans for it, timelines, that sort of thing is what I wanted to include in this video. Okay, I'm almost done wiring. I'm going to wire these 2 branches and then call that good for the wiring for now. Okay, wire's all placed. Now I'm going to see if I can bend this very much with that thick wire. Let's see how this goes. So even though I've had some experience with wiring over the years, only about 2 decades worth, it's not that much compared to some people who've been doing this a long time. And during my 2 decades, there's been a lot of times where I didn't wire trees. So some people can develop more wiring in less time than I've done. But I do have enough where I kind of have an idea how to twist, turn, and bend, and also where the breaking point is. I have a feeling, even with gloves, of when I'm getting to stretch the fibers a little bit too much. Stretch too much, they actually snap. So let's see how this goes. But there is a chance it could break. And that's one reason why I decided to use the $4 material instead of the $8 material or more expensive. So the first thing we're going to do is get in a comfortable position for this. Lets me get a little bit better leverage here at the lower section. And now I can start going. Sometimes I'll need to hold the wire in place with pliers because for this, again, not a lot of structural roots to hold it down. And this one I'm actually going to go with 2 pliers. Yep, so this one has hardly any distance that it can go before snapping. I turned it as much as you just saw, and I've already created a little bit more of a tear than I would normally put into this. That's okay. Ooh, yeah. Snappy, snappy. Okay, so keeping in mind where those tears are, I'm just going to keep moving up the trunk and putting in a little bit of turns here and there. Yeah, definitely as I've cleared this thickest section, it's starting to bend a little bit easier. Sometimes I'll go back and unbend a section just to push the 2 broken sections back together. Okay, I've come up with no less than 4 snaps as I've moved through this, but the trunk is still intact. It's got a little bit of curves in it. You notice when I was styling this, I was over the top. That allows me to see which direction the curves are going, and you can tell if you have a straight back and forth S shape, if you have a swirl. I've actually gone out and then swirled 2 directions as I've gone up. So I'm not really, again, considering a certain side of the front. I actually enjoy looking from the top because that gives me an idea of foliage placement as I'm turning around. So basically what it is, if I'm looking down and I see foliage in a clock type pattern around it where it's going to be all around, then I'll have good options for positioning pads and also positioning empty space in between the pads without huge open spaces that will look really funny from the side. So while I'm doing this also, I don't have any super amazing branches that I can build off of. This is really the only thick one I have down here at the base, and it's not really that great. It just happens to be thicker. So what I'm working on is I'm using actually 3 branches over here to create a pad of foliage well down the line. Same thing over here. I have a group of 2 that somewhat actually connects and builds onto this one, but will fill its own pad. And then again, I'm working my way up to fill more pads as I go. Now again, I also know I'm going to be wiring again down the line, so this is just to build something to work off of. Also, knowing how rosemary grows, if this looks sparse now, all I got to do is let it grow, do its thing over the summer. This one's actually going to be able to go a little bit faster to a bonsai pot than some of the other ones because of this structure. And I just have to finish setting the structure, getting it in the ground for about a season. I could also use a bigger pot for this. This one might actually go into a bigger pot just to have fun with it instead of growing in the ground. But we'll see. For right now, I'm just putting the structure and then moving on to some other things. Okay, good enough for me. So this one, I bent the branches so low to the bottom here that they no longer fit there in this pot. They're actually a little bit lower than the top of the pot. So I'm gonna see if I got another pot that I could put that in for now. Maybe. Yep, it's gonna work. Yeah, that'll be fine. I could just put in some soil mix. Just going to fill in the gap around here with some soil because I don't want those roots to have the cold air that's coming up. It's basically like an insulating material. I don't expect there to be a whole lot of root growth this time of year when this is kind of slowing down. Okay, we've reached the limits of this chopstick. As I come around to this other side, it's kind of a little difficult. So what I have is some other options. This chopstick's about that long, and I have other bamboo sticks and whatnot that I can use. This was from an arrow that I didn't need anymore, an archery arrow. Made out of bamboo, so it's perfect for this stuff. I'm not that great at archery, so I was breaking arrows as I was learning it. I haven't actually loosed an arrow for quite a while now, but I was making my own arrows and I was doing okay with them as far as the building the arrows, but I wasn't doing that great with actually hitting the target with them. Bamboo is pretty durable until you release it from a 60-pound traditional bow and expect to hit a target with it. At least for me, just kind of hitting the hard parts that were holding up the target, like I had some fence posts holding up my archery targets, and I was hitting those and just breaking arrows all the time. So the good thing about this little setup for this one is if I did decide that I wanted to keep this one as is for a bonsai, it would actually be just fine in this pot. But because I want to continue to grow it thicker, I am going to at least give it a bigger pot and comb out the roots, get them to start growing radially instead of vertically. So yeah, that's pretty cool though, right? Every now and then when you get a bunch of nursery stuff, you can find something that looks pretty nice like this. that's 3 down. Alright, since I decided to go and trim those other ones back, just knowing how this plant behaves, I'm going to go ahead and trim this one back also. Sometimes as I go through this, I just remember that plants, they just grow. No matter what I do to them, they're still going to want to grow in their natural patterns, and from what I've seen with rosemary, their natural pattern is to grow all of this upward growth. So I do want to start by trimming it down a little bit so that new upward growth will come out sideways slightly before it goes up. And you can certainly shear these, but what I'm doing is I'm aiming for certain positions on some of these. So it's basically that. So here we go. We got 2 different versions of these plants. We have one that looks like a bonsai, something like this. And we have one that looks like a trimmed down shrub. So this one I can keep in a pot and give it bonsai training kind of early because it has some start. But the pot it's going to be in will be a little bit bigger than this. It's going to be probably a round or a square, roughly at least double the amount of soil space that it has right now. And if I can, a little bit shallower. This one I'm going to be planting in the ground in spring. And when I do that, I'm actually going to figure out which direction I'm going to go first. And I think it's going to be something like that. It'll grow upwards from these points, and then I'll trim it back a little bit and probably plant it in another direction, maybe back upright. So 1 to 2 years or more at least of turning this back and forth to get the shape that I'm looking for on it. So there's that. It was just a little fun with some rosemaries for cheap. I don't see a lot of rosemary in bonsai right now. And actually, I just recently posted that on Instagram, and then I got a barrage of people saying, look at this rosemary that I've been working with. And you know what? I'm going to send you a picture tomorrow. This is a rosemary I've been growing for a while. I just kept on getting these messages of people that really enjoy their rosemaries. So this is my first time working with them for bonsai. I have worked with it for quite a while as a garden plant to use for cooking and just for looks. So we'll see how this goes over the years. Oh, they smell really good. It's like a Christmas tree, but also like just really good herby cooking. It's good stuff. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.